Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, that's John, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." And when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." He turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. The Gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I don't want to talk about Peter, and I don't want to talk about John, and I don't want to talk about the stone being rolled away from the tomb. Nor do I want to talk about the wrappings lying on the ground. And not even the angels do I want to talk about. I want to talk about Mary Magdalene, and her experience on this resurrection day. Mary comes to the tomb. Why does she come? Probably to make sure that everything was all right. Oftentimes, after a loved one has died, the family sends someone out the same day after the body has been buried to the graveyard. They do that just to make sure that the funeral director and the caretakers of the graveyard have done everything properly. And maybe that's all that Mary was doing. Going out to the tomb to make sure that everything had been taken care of properly. She gets there. She sees the stones rolled away. She doesn't know what to make of it. She wonders what's happened. And she goes back and tells the disciples, and we hear that Peter and John rush to the tomb, see the stones turned away, and see the body's gone. And they go back and tell the disciples. And then Mary turns again And this time, she looks into the tomb. She sees the clothes lying on the ground. She sees the body's gone. And she says, who would desecrate this grave? She thinks to herself, why have they abused his body? Wasn't it enough to do it on the cross? Why do they have to now abuse him again, desecrate him again by taking his body away? And the two angels appear. And Mary's crying. And the angels say to her, why are you weeping? And she says, they had taken my Lord. And then she turns around and she sees the gardener. She supposes it's the gardener. And he asks the same question, why are you weeping? And Mary says, don't you know? They've taken the body out of the grave, out of the tomb. If you've done this, tell me where you have laid him, and I'll take care of him. And at that precise moment, the gardener says, Mary. And Mary says, Rabboni, teacher, Jesus. And I think she must have just stood there, just like I am, speechless. And Jesus is so real. That Mary wants to hug him. She didn't want to hug him to physically prove that he was there. I'm sure she wanted to hug him out of her tremendous joy. And Jesus says, do not hug me. I must go to my Father, your Father, my God, your God. But go and tell my brothers, I'm ascending into heaven to my Father, your Father, my God, your God. And then he disappears. And Mary runs and tells the disciples, he is risen. He is risen. Who believes that? Do you believe that? If you try to think your way through the resurrection, if you try to understand the resurrection as you do your daily problems, your tasks at work, if you try to analyze, if you try to logically think this through, if you try to hold on to Jesus in this way, if you try to prove his physical resurrection through scientific thought, through analytical thought, through logic, you ain't going to come up believing. We believe in the resurrection through faith. And how do you get that faith? You don't think your way into faith. You don't try to make yourself believe. It doesn't happen that way. You don't hold on to Jesus that way. How do you do it? Let me give you an analogy. Have you ever been to a symphony? Beethoven's Fifth, Tchaikovsky's Fifth. And let the music take hold of you? It's so awe-inspiring. It's so powerful. The music takes over you, and you tap to it, like you people tap when they start playing a song. Until I interrupt it with my lousy voice. Have you ever read a novel like War and Peace? Over 1,000 pages long. Or maybe Farewell to Arms by Hemingway. And just let the characters take over. Or have you ever looked at a great painting and just let it inspire you? There was an art professor when I was a chaplain at a college, and we were talking about what happens when he paints. And he says, you know what happens? I start painting something, and what I'm painting takes me over. And it's almost like I'm no longer there, and I'm just painting. The characters in the painting, the figures in the painting start to develop what they call the muse. Or I've talked to novelists who've spoken about how the characters take on a life of their own, and they no longer, in a sense, control them. They just start writing, and that character does this stuff, and I'm no longer in control. And that's how music can affect you. Or a great movie, how you identify with the characters, and they take you over, and you are no longer in control. And you move with the characters. That's what faith is like. And that's how we read the Bible. That's how I read the Bible. The story of Zacchaeus, hopping down from the tree, because Jesus says, I'm going to eat at your house today. And Zacchaeus takes over my body. And I feel the joy that Zacchaeus feels. And Mary takes over our lives, and we feel the joy and the surprise and the speechlessness that Mary feels. And that's how faith comes. It's not your work. That's what Martin Luther said. It's not your work. It's a work of God. God takes over. God controls. And all of a sudden, you're out of your world. You're away from your cares and your troubles and all the problems that you face and all the duties and responsibilities that you have, and you let God take over, and God controls. And all of a sudden, like Mary, you hear, Albert, and you know it's your Lord. In the 10th chapter of John, Jesus says, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. And he goes on to say that the sheep recognize his voice. And Jesus says, Mary. And that sheep recognized his voice. And Jesus says, Robert and Bill and Jason and Jim and they recognize his voice and they say, my Lord, my God. Do you hear Jesus' voice? Do you hear him call? Jesus is calling your name. Jesus is calling you to faith.